First of all, thank you for joining us. This is again the Wisdom of Solomon, marveling at the wisdom at the depth of Kohelet. This is our fifth installment of the class, and at this point, we are beginning the second section of the book. Now, to clarify, this is not the second chapter of the book. This is the second section of the book. That means if you were to have a Kohelet written out on hide with all the laws that pertain to a book written in Hebrew, one of our holy books, there would be a slight break at this point where we're up to before moving on to the second part. Historically, we did not have chapters in our books for a long time. It was actually the Christians who came up with the idea of breaking our books up into chapters. And it was such a good system that we decided to go with it. So occasionally you'll have times where you look at where they decide to break it up and you wonder, that's just not a smart, that's not a great break. But for the most part, the breaks are pretty effective. So in this case, it's almost like we're at a new chapter, but it's not what you would call chapter 2, where instead in chapter 1 and we're moving on to verse 12. So until now, our discussion has been about the introductory verses. And there, King Solomon has given us a whole rundown of a lot of his basic premises. In the fact that, this world is, we mentioned this multiple times now, this world is Hevel, and we gave multiple explanations of what Hevel means, as opposed to the simple understanding of futility that has got many other meanings. That we've seen where he's gone ahead and kind of told us that no matter what type of person you are, the wisdom that you're going to find in this book is going to be helpful. Whether you're the type of person who runs whether you're the type of person who reacts well to stability, or whether you're the type of person who's constantly in flux, doesn't matter exactly what type of person you are, you're going to gain from the wisdom of this book. And the final thing that we brought up last week was where King Solomon informs us that while you may think sometimes that something that was written 2,000-3,000 years ago no longer applies to us nowadays, in reality it does. And it's the certain truths don't change and they stick around forever. And therefore there's nothing that we can there's nothing that you're not going to lose out by reading this book, even though it's written a long time ago, because as he points out, there's nothing new under the sun. Certain things are going to be timeless. So with that, and without any further ado, we're going to move on to verse number 12, which again is the beginning of the second part. Let me put up my share screen so that everyone can see what we're looking at. Okay, let me just raise the font size so everyone can see a little better. Okay. Now, as I mentioned last week, you'll notice that right over here, there's a little letter, the Hebrew letter pei in brackets. That's to indicate that there would be a break in the, if you found a version of this written on parchment, there would be a break there to indicate a new heading. With these verses, we're going to start I would consider this his second intro. So until now, he's introduced what you need to know about the book before going on any further. At this point, he's going to start discussing the actual search for truth and the search for wisdom. As we mentioned before, that is really what King Solomon is most famous for. And that's the name of the class, right? The Wisdom of Solomon, which of course, if you know anything about comic books, I stole that from the original Captain Marvel, but that's totally a side point. Hence the marveling at the depths of Kohelet. But in reality, that is what King Solomon was most famous for, the wisest of all men, Chacham Mikol Adam. He was the wisest of all men, of all people. Again, I'm sorry to use, that's not, try to avoid gendered language. So he is the smartest of all people, of all humanity. And so in this case, King Solomon is now telling us what the process that he went through to determine what are timeless truths that he can keep, that he's going to put into this book. Okay, that's what he's going to be doing for the rest of chapter 1. And whenever you're discussing a search for truth, there's a number of things you have to control for. You have to, first of all, control for the source that you're getting your truth from. You have to control for your own personal bias. There are all sorts of things that a person needs to focus on and to be careful of when searching for wisdom or truth. And that's what he's gonna show us in his own way, obviously, how he's gonna go and make sure that he avoids bringing too much of his self into it, and instead giving us something that's pure wisdom, pure truth. Okay. All right. As we've done in the past, chapter with the verse 12 is right over here. I'm not going to provide the English, or instead we're going to read out the English together, and that way we get a more pure version of what the words mean. So let me just highlight this over here. This is going to be our introductory sentence to the second introduction of Kohelet. That's the easiest way to put it. Okay. So verse 12, and he's going to repeat something that he's basically said already back in verse number 1. Ani Koheles, I am Kohelet, Hayiti Melech al Yisrael B'Yerushalayim, and I was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Okay, and we talked about this. We touched on this back in the first verse over here, in verse number 1 of chapter 1, where he's identifying 3 reasons why he's worth listening to. Okay, number 1, he is Kohelet and he is king. So those two will really go together. We've mentioned before that the idea of Kohelet is that he is makhel. He has the ability to gather people together. We've mentioned before that according to some understandings, the book of Kohelet was written from the wisdom that he shared at the event of Hakhel, which happens at the year following the sabbatical year, the year following Shemitah. The king would get up and give over Torah and wisdom to the Jewish people. So in some regards, this is a book of those collections of sayings. But what's important is that King Solomon has as in his role as king, and not just any king, but he was King Solomon, who had tremendous, great relations with all the nations around him, all the nations of the world. He had the ability to gather all the people together and the greatest minds together and have them work against each other and work together to identify proper wisdom. Not only that, he is king over Israel. So that's we tend to be a pretty smart people, thank God. But even besides for that, it was a people dedicated to wisdom. Whether we are naturally smart or not, that's not probably something that we can determine. But we are a people who value wisdom. And so he's not only king, but he's king over Israel. And finally, he's king over Israel in Jerusalem, meaning to say that that's a city of scholars also. It's a city where people who gather there tend to be more scholarly. So when you have a person who has the financial means, he has the political means to gather all the wise people to one place and have that discussion with them, what is wisdom? So that's somebody that, first of all, from one direction now, at least you can trust them for as somebody who's provided you with proper wisdom. Okay. Yeah. So again, this is a reiteration of his qualification to provide you with wisdom. And he's going to do this a number of times throughout the book, kind of remind us, kind of check-ins to remind us that why he's worth listening to. He's kind of the subject matter expert, the SME as they call it, of wisdom. Right? He's got all the means and resources to make sure that he's providing us with proper wisdom. Okay. I'd just like to point out one interesting factoid that the rabbis pull out of this verse over here. It's interesting that they pull it out of this verse and not any of the other verses of the book of Kohelet. But the rabbis, there's a famous legend, which is actually mentioned in the Gemara and the Talmud in Gittin, which is this second page that I'm going to pull up here in a moment. And it's really beyond the scope of our discussion right now, but it's always worth giving the background. And we trust these legends to be true, whether all the facts are to be taken on their face value or not is not for me to say. But all the facts here are true. The entire account is true to some degree or another. That King Solomon was famously, when he was in the process of building the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, he went ahead and, well, so we have a certain quirk in our laws that you're not allowed to build the altar, the Mizbeach, with using metal tools, because metal is there to shorten the life of mankind. It's used for weaponry, so therefore we don't use it for our for building the Mizbeach, which is there to grant a person salvation from their sins, and to then go and grow from there and live a longer and more fulfilled life. So we don't use metal, and therefore he had to use what it's brought down in legend as the shamir worm, which had the ability, it was a worm that had the ability to cut stone perfectly. And so there's a whole story about how he sent his Kohen Gadol, who was under him, the man by the name of Ben Yehoyada, and he sent him to go and find the shamir worm. And in order to do that, Ben Yehu needed the help of the king of demons, whose name was Ashmedai. Again, some of these concepts are beyond me, but we understand that there's truth to all of it. In the process of convincing Ashmedai to give him the information he needed for the worm, there's a period of time, the Gemara states, I believe it was 7 years long, where Ashmedai actually kicked King Solomon out of the kingdom and took his persona for a while and ruled the Jewish people again for 7 years. And there's a whole story about how King Solomon was sent, hundreds of miles away and had to walk the entire way back to Jerusalem all by himself. And the entire time, and that's actually what this Gemara here is talking about, what this Talmud is talking about, is it's discussing another verse that we're going to get into the next chapter. King Solomon says, Zehaya chelki mikol amali. This was my portion from all of my toil. The Gemara asks, what does it mean, and this and this was my portion? Okay, so again, whatever, there's a lot of background that we're missing here because we're just giving it a quick rundown. But there's this disagreement in the Gemara between a man named Rav and a man named Shmuel, who are some of the primary positions in the Gemara. And they discuss, what is it that King Solomon always kept? What was he always in control of, the portion that he always had control of? So one says it was his staff. One opinion said that he always had control of his staff. And the other said that he was referring to his cloak. Okay, maklo and gundo, his staff and his cloak. Either way, he always maintained a control over his staff or his cloak, his personal items. He always maintained some level of control over them. And the Gemara then goes and recounts that he would go from door to door, all the way from wherever he was, all the way to Jerusalem. And he said, everywhere where he went, he would say, I am Kohelet. I was the king of the Jewish people in Jerusalem. Our verse over here that we're discussing. So I think the Gemara is harping upon the point that Hayiti means past tense. I was king. So at what point was King Solomon not king? And that's where we're saying that there was a period of time where he was not king over the Jewish people. So he's saying, I was king over the Jewish people. And when he finally came to the high court in Jerusalem, the rabbi said, you don't find a insane person who sticks to one point and never veers away from it. So the fact that this man is coming, and all the way from wherever he was, all the way to Jerusalem, he had insisted that he was king of Israel. There's probably something we have to research. And then the Gemara goes, and the continuation of the Gemara recounts how he went ahead and went about proving who he was. So that, again, that's beyond the scope of our course over here. What we do find is that King Solomon maintains that he was king over the Jewish people in Jerusalem. And an interesting piece over here is that the entire time that he wasn't acting as king, he maintained a level of control akin to kingship over something. Again, according to one opinion, it was his staff, and according to the other opinion, it was his cloak. But either way, he maintained a level of royalty that he never gave up on, and that's what ended up standing for him in the end. Again, this was my portion from all my toil, all the work that he put in. This stood for me. He was able to finally bring his either staff or cloak back to Jerusalem and say, "See, I'm the real deal." So this is an interesting kind of side point is the traits of kingship are something that's innate and inherent to a person, and if they, I guess, it means something if a person acts with royalty, even to their innate object. Their physical objects around them. If they treat themselves like royalty, that will have some standing with other people. Just a side point. That's not really the lesson from our verse, but it's something that the rabbis point out from the verse over here. Again, if you want to find more about that and the rest of the story, that is in Gittin on 68b. All right. So again, that's the introductory statement for this now second intro to Kohelet. That he's reiterating his qualifications to tell us to share wisdom with us. Okay, and with that we are going to move on to verse number 13. Right, we just highlight it so it's easy to spot. Okay. So we're going to break this down piece by piece. It's a long verse, so we're going to break it down piece by piece, and then we're going to read it all together. V'nasati es libi, and I put my heart to it. To it. We're going to discuss what it is. So I placed my heart, meaning I dedicated myself to a goal. What is the goal? Lidrosh, to seek. Vilatur, we're going to discuss what exactly that means, but it's another idea of seeking. Bachachma, in wisdom. So I went to seek to seek and inspect wisdom. Al kol asher naasa tachat hashamayim, for all those things, or on all those things that were made under the heaven. And he points out, hu inyan ra, it is a bad thing. Nasan Elokim livnei ha'adam lanos bo, that God has given to the people to test them or to pain them. Now, a lot of these words, and we're going to find this many times, we're going to find this phrase many times throughout Kohelet. And again, this is going to be one of our phrases that is going to lead people to believe that Kohelet is a downer of a book. And we're going to see that it's not so simple. But this idea of inyan ra, literally in modern Hebrew, we would say inyan is an idea. Okay, so it's a bad idea that God went ahead and gave us the ability to do something. We haven't exactly stated what it is, whether we're talking about wisdom. Okay, so we're going to have to break this verse down a little better to understand better what it is. But let's read the entire verse together. That way we can see how it flows. V'nasati es libi, I have put my heart, lidrosh vilatur b'chachma, to seek and search out wisdom. Al kol asher na'asa tachas hashamayim, for all those things that are made under the heavens. Hu inyan ra, it is a bad idea. Nasan Elokim livnei ha'adam lanos bo, that Hashem, that God has given to the children of mankind to be tested with or to suffer with. Okay. Again, we have to figure out what is this thing that he's talking about. What's the bad idea? Why is it? What is the meaning behind an idea? And again, what are these other terms that we have over here? So let's break it down a little bit in order to get a fuller understanding. Number one is the first phrase over here, V'nasati es libi, I have put my heart to something. We're going to see in the coming verses that he's going to switch back and forth between heart and eyes. And when you talk about, we have a phrase in English, seeing is believing. Okay. And it's pretty clear from a lot of our Talmudic sources that that's not exactly a very wise path for a person to go through to live their life. That seeing is believing. If I don't see something, I don't believe it's there. Okay, we see this with science all the time. When you are dealing with scientific things, well, I can't see germs, so they don't exist. Obviously, that would be a foolish take for a person to take on their life. And so, when it comes to wisdom, we don't want to be seeing things. We want to be understanding them. We want to be thinking about them. We want to be doing more than just seeing and accepting the things that enter through our eyes. We want to be investigating things. So that's the contrast that we're going to find between the heart and the eyes over here in this first in this intro over here. Is it whenever sorry, whenever he's referring to the heart, he's referring to proper investigation, proper thinking, philosophy, and really going through through an idea and breaking it down to its essential ideas, as opposed to, again, seeing, as we're going to see in the next verse. Seeing is going to be either subjective or not a proper, not a full encounter with wisdom. So that's an important point over here. Whenever he's referring again to his heart, he's going to be speaking about, he's going to be giving the idea over of this is something that is true because I've researched it beyond what I just saw. I'm researched it in my heart. The next piece is we have two ideas of seeking. So we have lidrosh, and again, drisha is usually expounding on something. So you have a piece of information, and then you take it out and you pull out deeper knowledge from that thing. This is what we're doing over here. And that's if you go to shul, to the synagogue on Shabbat, and the rabbi gives a drasha, that's what he's trying to do. They're trying to take the ideas that are kind of placed there in the Torah and expound and bring something out of it. So that's what lidrosh means, to take something that's there and to expound. The latur is an interesting idea because you don't usually find this term when it comes to wisdom. The number one time and that you're going to find it in the Tanakh is in reference to the spies who went to search out the land of Canaan before the Jews went in. And unfortunately, the Jews accepted their ill report and ended up wandering the desert for 40 years. That term, latur, keeps on showing up. So again, that idea is basically an idea of spying, but how does that fit exactly with wisdom? And for that, I'd like to whip out a little piece here from Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, Rabbi Samson Hirsch, who was a tremendous rabbi of Frankfurt, and before that, rabbi of Moravia, which is a humongous section of Germany in the 19th century. But he's famous for his approach to discussing Chumash and discussing the words of the Torah and determining exactly what each root word means and how it fits in each situation. So in regards to the spies in the desert, he explains like this. Tur, this shoresh, taf vav reish, designates not only searching in general, a purely objective searching of things in general, by joining together all the known peculiarities of a thing to get an idea of what it really is. But where occurs with a subjective, I read that wrong. Sorry, he says that the idea of Tur, the idea of searching with this terminology is specifically to give an idea of objective searching into something. Where we're trying to come out with not just a idea of what we see about it, but here's where he's throwing in objectivity. That we're trying to take a step back, look at it, the bigger picture in general, and figure out what is wisdom beyond what I think is wisdom, and beyond what you think is wisdom. What in reality is wisdom? So again, drosh meaning to expound on an idea and to pull it out of what's in front of you. And latur is to look at something objectively and kind of take yourself out of the picture and research wisdom in and of itself. Okay, and again, the subject over here is chachma, is wisdom. Okay, so moving on to the second piece of the verse over here. It says, Al kol asher nasa tachas hashamayim, for all those things that have been created under the heavens. We mentioned before, under the heavens means that we're focusing right now on physical items. When talking about physical items as opposed to spiritual items. Now he's going to discuss plenty of spiritual ideas over here, but really the first foray into the discussion of wisdom that we're going to find is him facing the physical. What is the purpose of of everything that we have? What's the purpose to happiness? What's the purpose to material possessions? He's not going to say that they're all nothing. As we've said, hevel, we don't like to translate hevel as futility. It's something. And so that's what we're going to be doing, is he's not going to be rejecting everything, nor is he going to be accepting everything. He's going to be, as we said, expounding and objectively researching wisdom for all physical matter first. Okay. Now he throws in this hu inyan ra. This is a bad idea. Okay. And again, idea, that's a more modern take to the word inyan. There's a lot of discussion in the commentaries here what this word inyan means. Rashi himself, Rashi is kind of the king of our commentaries. He points out two potential source root words for inyan. One of them is ma'on, which would have the shorish, the root would be the letter mem, ayin, nun. In which case, a ma'on is a house, or is a dwelling place, which it would be strange to fit into this verse over here, but it means it's a bad settling in a way. It's not well settled. That's one understanding of the word inyan. Second understanding of the word inyan that Rashi gives, it is from the idea of iyun, which means to look into something. Again, kind of our mother word for eyes, which is ayin, right? Your eyes look into something. So again, the root word over here would be a investigation. So it's a bad investigation or a bad subject. Either way, the idea is still the same, similar to an idea, but it's a bad subject. What is this bad subject? And this is how most of the commentaries explain this the flow of this verse over here, Rashi included and others, is that the bad thing that King Solomon is talking about is the fact that Nosan Elokim Livneha Adam La'anospo, that God has put everything in our hands to figure out for ourselves. Okay. In other words, he's lamenting over the idea of free will. Now, free will is very important. We are a religion that loves free will. It's an essential piece to our service of God. Without free will, you wouldn't have service, you wouldn't have reward, you wouldn't have punishment, you wouldn't have anything, right? It's one of the chief requirements for understanding for Jewish philosophy. Okay, it's not what we would call an ikar. It's not an essential, which is interesting, and the commentaries discuss a lot. Not commentaries here, but the Jewish philosophers discuss a lot why, for example, the Rambam in his 13 Principles of Faith does not include a belief in free will. But regardless, free will is very important to Judaism. We don't believe that we are just the results of our surroundings and that we have no choice in what we do. We believe very much that we are everything that we do is in our hands to accomplish. However, in regards to the relationship between free will and wisdom, it would be nice, he's basically saying, it would be nice if God gave us a little more instruction. And again, he puts this in kind of a harsh term. He's saying it's a bad idea. Again, if we're going with a very simple reading of the words, bad idea, that which God has given over all this responsibility and just plopped it in our hands. Okay. Again, a lot of the commentaries bring this out from the word nasan, that Hashem has placed it. Right. It's not that he it's not that he guided us in how to do this. It's that he kind of just plopped it in our laps. All right, you, humanity, is going to be in charge of wisdom and controlling wisdom and maintaining wisdom and all the guiding yourselves in how to use wisdom, how to control the spread of wisdom, etc. Right? We see this a lot nowadays. Right? One of the big kind of keywords nowadays is misinformation. Right? So we have wisdom, but it's being spread improperly, right? Or other factors are coming in and misguiding people's information. So that's a hot topic right now. It has been since, before COVID, but COVID especially, misinformation. So here's a great case where King Solomon is just echoing the same thing we all say, that it's too bad there's no one, wisdom is wisdom, and there's no questioning it. Now, we actually happen to have that. We have the Torah to a certain degree, which if you know how to use it, the Torah is going to be the manual to life. It's going to be God's guidebook for us. But in reality, not everyone has access to it. Not everyone knows how to use it. And so therefore, wisdom gets put in the hands of the everyman. And when wisdom is put in the hands of the everyman, it is, as King Solomon puts it, almost a bad idea. Not that he's saying that God made a bad idea, but it's not to our benefit. And as he points out over here, la'anos bo, we suffer to a certain degree from it. We suffer from our own wisdom. Okay. Again, this is not meant to be a downer in that sense. It's that I use the term lamenting. He is lamenting that that's the case. But as I pointed out, he's leading us towards, well, there's got to be some guide for how to get to wisdom and how to control and know that you're on the right track. And that's, of course, the Torah, and that's what he's going to be doing through this book. And again, as he's already qualified himself, he's the guy to turn to if you want to understand wisdom. He's got all the resources. They did plenty of research on the topic, and they're worth listening to. Okay, so that's the idea over here. So I placed, and again, so the general gist of the verse over here is saying that we've got wisdom, and we all have it. We all have it to some degree or another. Human beings as a whole, we are the wise ones, and whether that's to our benefit or detriment, that's, unfortunately, there's good parts and bad parts, but there is a way to research it and look through it objectively, to take yourself out of the picture, and again, latour, to inspect it objectively, and lidrosh, to take what's in front of you and to expand and pull things out of it, and come to understand it. And again, his first subject over here is we're going to be talking about those things that are tachat hashamayim, those things that are under the heaven, the physical realm of things. So that is the general idea of verse 13. And with that, we're just going to jump briefly into verse 14. I didn't give a chance before, so let me do it right now. If anybody wants to pipe in quickly before we move on to the next verse, I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Okay, so we're going to move on to verse 14. Let me just scroll down a little bit so it's in the middle of the page. Okay, here's verse 14. Now, we just mentioned in verse 13 that the lave, the heart, is going to be objective research, objective wisdom, where King Solomon in this case, is putting himself aside and properly researching something. Here, he starts off the verse with saying, Re'isi es kol ha'ma'asim. I have seen all those things, shena'asu tachas hashamash, that have been made under the sun. Okay, I've seen them all. And when I see them, my first reaction is, V'hinei hakol hevel u'ru'us ruach. All of it is hevel and ru'us ruach, which we'll discuss a little bit more what exactly this idea of ru'us is. It's also a little bit difficult of a word to get to the root translation over there. So again, to read it all together, Ra'isi es kol hamasim, I've seen all those creations, Shanasu tachas hashamesh, that are made under the sun, V'hinei, and behold, hakol hevel, all of it is hevel, all right, this word that we don't want to translate as futility, and Ra'us ruach. Okay, so, and I mentioned this back by verse number 2, that we're going to find hevel as an adjective commonly throughout the book. And we never answered the question, but we threw out the question. Each time he's going to state hevel, what is his intention? What's he trying to show us with this word hevel? Again, we said hevel in general means, literally the word means steam. The idea that we were kind of going with it was that it's fleeting, if it's bogging you down, it's something that you'll eventually move past. If it's something that you're trying to capture, you have to work hard to distill vapor. And so and if you try to grab it, it will usually leave your hands. So, but there's ways to do it. And also that there's it doesn't mean nothing. Doesn't mean futile in the sense of nothing. It means that there is something there. There's something, it's just hard for us to comprehend. So again, over here, we have this word hevel showing up, and I kind of want to find a catch-all word for that hevel yet, but I haven't quite found the right word for that. So again, I'm going to read the verse one more time, and then we'll discuss a little bit more. Re'isias kol ha'ma'asim, I have seen all the creations, shenasu tachas hashamesh, that have been created, that have been made under the sun. V'hinei hakol hevel urus ruach, and behold, all of it is hevel and ru'us ruach. So, ru'us, there's a discussion in the commentaries what exactly the root word over here is. The simple understanding of it would be it's our word ra that we had over here, meaning bad. It's bad-spirited. Okay, it doesn't really work. That's an understanding of what ru'us ruach means. It's of bad spirit, but it doesn't really work with the sentence structure. Okay, the word ru'us, it would be ra'as, it would be, there's all other ways that would be written, so it doesn't seem to work very well. Most of the commentaries learn that ru'us ruach means the shoresh, the root of that is an idea of breaking. Okay, it is spirit breaking. Okay, so if you were to look, again, King Solomon says, when we look with our eyes, as opposed to our hearts, when we look with our eyes at all the things that are in front of us, we find at first glance that it is both hevel, fleeting, and spirit breaking, which I don't have a great understanding yet on what that idea of spirit breaking is. I think the idea is basically that it could wear you down if you spend too much time thinking about it. What are all these things here in this world for? It could wear you down looking at it. But again, the important piece is, and this is why it still fits with our theory on Kohelet, is that we're talking here still about Re'iyah. We're talking about seeing this world, seeing the physical things in this world, as opposed to understanding with our hearts the things of the physical aspects of this world. So when you're seeing these things, King Solomon tells us that, yeah, my first reaction is just like anybody else's first reaction. My first reaction is that, everything is nothingness, and it can break your heart to consider how nothing everything is. But again, we're going to see that here's our contrast. Here, he's talking about seeing, as opposed to, we're going to get a little farther in the verses next week, and we're going to see that he instead brings it back. He has kind of a conversation between the eyes and the heart, where the eyes are just, when they're taking their subjective glance at the world, they are saying one thing, but once he digests it in his heart, then it comes out a little differently. All right, so that's where we're going to stop for right now. Again, we went through these three verses, verse 12, 13, and 14. That's chapter 1, 12, 13, 14. And again, this is the the opening verses to the second intro to the book of Kohelet. Next week, we're going to start with verse number 15, which is probably one of the most well-known and oft-quoted verses in Kohelet. So we're going to see how that fits in to how we're reading the book. Check back in next week, and I'll see you all then.